The silence in that boardroom would become a legend, a stillness so profound that people would later swear they could hear the frantic beating of guilty hearts. But the story did not begin in silence. It began on a Sunday, with the sound of a teacup clicking against its saucer, a delicate, repetitive noise that had become the soundtrack to Clara's slow and methodical erasure. Eleanor, her mother-in-law, sat in the armchair that had been Clara's grandmother's, a piece of furniture Eleanor had once described as quaintly provincial. She held the porcelain cup with a grip that was both elegant and proprietary, as if she were the lady of this house and Clara merely a long-term guest whose welcome was wearing thin. Every Sunday, for the past 5 years, Eleanor had visited, and every Sunday, David, Clara's husband, would find a reason to be absent for the first hour, leaving them alone. It was a ritual, he claimed, for them to bond. Clara knew it was a ritual of inspection and subtle warfare. "The garden is looking a little weary, dear," Eleanor commented, her gaze fixed out the window but her words aimed directly at Clara's heart. Her voice was like crushed velvet, soft on the surface, but abrasive underneath. "Much like you, I suppose. This house requires a certain energy." Clara offered a tight, polite smile, the kind she had perfected over years of these weekly inquisitions. "It's been a busy week at the foundation, Eleanor. Things are just a bit overwhelming right now." She worked part-time at a local arts charity, a role Eleanor often referred to as her little hobby. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "Yes, your hobbies. They must be very taxing." The click of the cup returning to the saucer was louder this time, a full stop on the conversation. "David and I were talking. We're worried about you, Clara. About your ability to manage things." Clara's smile faltered. A cold knot began to form in her stomach, the familiar harbinger of an impending ambush. "Manage what things?" "Everything is fine." "Is it?" Eleanor leaned forward, her perfectly coiffed silver hair unmoving. "Your father's company, for instance, a legacy left in your name, and from what David tells me, it's circling the drain. It's a burden, dear. A weight you are simply not equipped to carry." The mention of her father was a sharp, physical pain. He had passed away 2 years ago, leaving her his controlling interest in a small specialized technology firm, Innovatic. It had been his life's work. Clara held the shares in a trust, with David having been granted a proxy to advise on her behalf, a decision made in the fog of grief and at his gentle insistence. She had been too lost to argue. "The tech market is volatile," Clara said, her voice a little unsteady. "David is handling it. He says it just needs time." Eleanor's laugh was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "Time is money, Clara. And you are running out of both. David is trying to protect you, to salvage what little is left before it all collapses and becomes a public embarrassment. He has a plan, but it requires your full cooperation." The front door opened, and David walked in, his handsome face arranged into a mask of loving concern. He was always perfectly timed, the rescuer arriving just as his mother landed the final blow. He kissed Clara's cheek, a gesture that felt cold and performative, before turning his attention to his mother. "Mother, I hope you haven't been tiring Clara out." "Just a necessary conversation, darling," Eleanor replied, her eyes gleaming. "About the future. About protecting this family." David pulled a sheaf of papers from his leather briefcase and placed them on the coffee table between them. The top page was thick, embossed with the name of their family law firm. Clara stared at it, the knot in her stomach tightening into a solid ball of ice. "Clara, honey," David began, his voice smooth and placating, the one he used when he was about to ask for something she didn't want to give. "We need to be practical. Your father's company is in serious debt. I've been trying to manage it, but my hands are tied. The board is old-fashioned, loyal to your father's memory, but blind to modern realities. They won't listen to me as just your proxy." He slid the papers across the table. "This is a simple transfer of authority. It gives me full, unrestricted control of your shares. It will allow me to make the hard decisions needed to save the company. to liquidate failing assets, restructure, perhaps even arrange a strategic sale. It's the only way to protect your inheritance, what's left of it. Clara looked from the papers to his face. There was no warmth in his eyes, only an impatient, hungry gleam. She saw her grandmother's armchair, the weary garden, the teacup held like a weapon. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a rescue. It was an acquisition. "You want me to sign over my father's company," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor scoffed from her chair. "Don't be so dramatic, dear. It's a formality. You don't understand business. You never have. You are a decorative thing, Clara. Beautiful and sweet, but not built for the pressures of the real world. Leave the important matters to us." A decorative thing. The phrase echoed in the sudden silence of the room. It landed with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at David, waiting for him to defend her, to rage against his mother's cruelty. She waited for the man she had married, the man who had vowed to love and protect her. He just smiled. A tight, encouraging little smile. "She's just being blunt, honey, but she's right. This is for the best. It's to protect you." And in that moment, seeing the seamless alliance between mother and son, the shared, predatory light in their eyes, Clara understood. The slow erasure was over. This was the final stroke, the one that would wipe her completely from the picture. Her grief, her trust, her love, they had all been used as tools to pry her father's legacy from her hands. She looked down at the documents, her vision blurring. She felt a strange calm settle over her, a chilling clarity in the eye of the storm. She reached out a hand, not for the pen David was offering, but for the papers themselves. "I'll need to read them over," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't sign anything today." David's smile tightened. "There's no time, Clara. The creditors are circling. A decision needs to be made by the board meeting on Friday. Then I will give you my answer before Friday," she replied, standing up. She held the legal documents against her chest like a shield. "Thank you for the tea, Eleanor. I have a headache. I'm going to go lie down." She walked out of the room without another word, her back straight, her steps even. She didn't cry. She closed her bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, the thick paper crinkling in her grip. The silence from downstairs was more damning than their words had been. They were waiting. They believed they had already won, and as she stood there, the full weight of their betrayal crashing down on her, a cold, hard resolve began to form where her broken heart had been. They thought she was a decorative thing. They had no idea what she was truly made of. They had forgotten who her father was, and they had grossly, fatally underestimated his daughter. The war had been declared in the quiet clinking of a teacup, and she had no intention of losing. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Clara moved through her home like a ghost of her former self, quiet, compliant, and seemingly defeated. She made their meals, asked David about his day, and offered weak, apologetic smiles whenever he brought up the papers. "I'm still reading them," she would murmur. "It's just so much to take in." Her apparent fragility fed his arrogance. He saw her reluctance, not as resistance, but as the predictable confusion of a simple mind grappling with complex issues. He grew more confident with each passing hour, certain that she would eventually capitulate. He and his mother treated her with a cloying, condescending kindness that was more insulting than their previous cruelty. They were humoring the child before she signed away her inheritance. But behind the facade of the broken wife, a different Clara was emerging. The part of her that had been dormant for years, the part she had inherited directly from her father, was waking up. Her father, Thomas, had not been a simple man. To the world, he was a quiet, unassuming engineer, but in his workshop, he had been a genius, a visionary who saw the world in patterns and possibilities that others missed. He had taught her to look beyond the surface, to question everything, and to understand that the most powerful components are often the smallest and most overlooked. She remembered their hours together in his workshop, the the smell of solder and ozone in the air. He would let her handle delicate circuit boards, explaining the flow of logic and power. "Never assume, Clara," he told her, his voice a low rumble. "Assumptions are the death of innovation and the foundation of every good con. Test everything, verify everything, trust the data, not the sales pitch." He had raised her to be a thinker, a strategist, a scientist. She had buried that part of herself when she met David, wanting to be loved for her heart, not her mind. She had believed his charm was the data. She had been a fool. On Monday night, after David was asleep, snoring softly beside her, Clara slipped out of bed. She went to her jewelry box, a simple wooden chest her father had made for her. She bypassed the necklaces and earrings and felt for a false bottom he had built into it years ago. Inside lay a single object, a small, silver USB drive. It was unadorned, sleek, and cool to the touch. It had been his last gift to her, given to her in the hospital a week before he passed. "Everything you need is on here," he had whispered, his breath ragged. "My real work, my real legacy. Don't let the jackals get it, Clara. And don't trust anyone with it until you're sure. People are not always what they seem." At the time, she thought he was rambling, his mind clouded by medication. She had taken the drive as a final memento, a keepsake of his brilliant, chaotic mind. She had never once plugged it in. Now his words felt like a prophecy. She took the drive to her small home office, a room David rarely entered, and inserted it into her laptop. The computer whirred for a moment before a single, password-protected folder appeared on the screen. The password prompt was a simple question. "What is the first principle?" Clara smiled through a fresh wave of grief. It was their old game. The answer was his mantra. She typed it in, "Verify." The folder opened, revealing a trove of files that made her breath catch in her throat. It was not just a collection of his work, it was his entire secret life. There were detailed schematics for projects far more advanced than anything Innovative had ever publicly announced. There were patent applications filed under shell corporations for technologies that could revolutionize several industries, and there were the financial records. Not the clean, simplified versions presented to the board, but the raw, unedited ledgers. She started with the company's finances. For hours, she traced the flow of money, her father's meticulous notes guiding her through a labyrinth of shell accounts, inflated invoices, and suspicious transfers. A pattern began to emerge. For the past 18 months, since David had been granted proxy advisory, small but regular sums of money had been siphoned from the research and development budget. They were disguised as payments to third-party consultants and suppliers, companies that, after a quick search, she found were registered to shell corporations. The director of those corporations? A name she recognized with a sickening lurch, Eleanor Vance, her mother-in-law. The scale of the fraud was staggering. They had been systematically bleeding the company dry, starving the very projects that were its future, all while building a narrative that the company was failing due to her father's outdated vision. They were not trying to save Innovatic. They were murdering it, selling it for parts while pocketing the insurance money. The proposed sale David had mentioned wasn't a rescue mission, it was the final heist. Clara felt a cold fury wash over her, so potent it left her trembling. It was an anger so pure and clean it burned away the last vestiges of her grief and sorrow. They had not only betrayed her, they had desecrated her father's memory. They had taken his life's work, the thing he had poured his soul into, and used it as their personal piggy bank. The phrase, "a decorative thing," echoed in her mind, no longer an insult, but a declaration of war. They saw her as an ornament, something to be dusted off and displayed, utterly unaware of the complex machinery whirring inside. She kept digging. She found another folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside was a single video file and a series of encrypted documents. She clicked on the video. Her father's face appeared, looking tired but resolute. It was a video diary, filmed just a few months before his death. "If you're watching this, Clara," he began, his voice strained, "it means I'm gone, and you're in trouble. I suspected something was wrong. Small inconsistencies. A general resistance from David to my new line of research. He kept calling it a vanity project, steering investment away from it." He sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "Nightingale is everything. It's a new type of biometric encryption, unbreakable. The applications are limitless. Military, financial, personal data. I've kept its development completely off the official books, funding it myself. The patents are secured. The only existing data is on this drive." He looked directly into the camera, his eyes seeming to pierce through the screen and find hers. "The company's current valuation is a lie. It's a shell. The real value is Nightingale. Without it, Innovatic is worth very little. With it, it's worth billions. David doesn't know the full extent of it, but I believe he and his mother suspect something. They're trying to devalue the company to force a cheap sale to a competitor. I've seen the preliminary inquiries. A company called Argent Solutions. They want to buy Innovatic for pennies on the dollar, absorb its patent portfolio, and bury Nightingale forever, as it would threaten their own inferior products." Clara's blood ran cold. Argent Solutions. He'd framed them as a potential white knight, a buyer who might save them from bankruptcy. It was all a lie. It was a conspiracy. "Be careful, Clara," her father's image warned. "They see you as a means to an end. They see your love as a liability, but I raised you to be smarter than that. Use your mind. Use what I've given you. The data is your weapon. Don't let them win." The video ended. Clara sat back, the screen casting a pale blue light on her face. The grief was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but it was now overlaid with a diamond-hard resolve. Her father had not left her a failing company. He had left her a test, a puzzle, and a weapon. David and Eleanor thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They were about to find out they were facing a queen, and she had her father's playbook in her hand. Her next move would not be one of defense. It would be a carefully planned, meticulously executed attack. The first call she made was at 7 in the morning. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years, the direct line to her best friend from college, Maya. Maya was everything Clara wasn't: sharp-tongued, cynical, and ruthlessly pragmatic. She was also one of the most brilliant corporate lawyers in the city. "Clara?" Maya's voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened instantly. "It's 7 a.m. Is your house on fire?" "Not yet," Clara replied, her voice low and even. "But I'm about to light one. Can you meet me?" "It's about my father's company." An hour later, they were sitting in a quiet corner of a 24-hour diner, the air thick with the smell of coffee and stale grease. Clara laid it all out: the Sunday visit, Eleanor's insult, David's ultimatum, and the contents of the silver USB drive. She watched as Maya's expression shifted from sleepy annoyance to sharp predatory focus. When Clara finished, Maya took a long sip of her black coffee, her eyes gleaming with a fierce light. "Well," Maya said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face, "it seems your husband and his mother have been very, very busy. And very, very stupid. They think I'm going to sign the papers," Clara said. "They've called a board meeting for Friday to push through the sale to Argent Solutions. They think I'm just a decorative thing." Maya's smile widened. "Oh, that's perfect. That's just beautiful. Arrogance is a self-inflicted wound, and these two are bleeding out and don't even know it. We're not going to just stop them, Clara. We're going to annihilate them." Over the next 3 days, Maya's small, unassuming office became their war room. They worked with a relentless, focused energy. Maya brought in a forensic accountant, a grizzled man named Arthur, who had a bloodhound's nose for financial fraud. Clara provided him with the raw ledgers from her father's drive, and Arthur's eyes lit up with professional glee. "This is beautiful," he'd muttered, hunched over his laptop. "It's so blatant. They didn't even try to be clever. They assumed no one would ever look. The transfers to Eleanor's shell companies, the falsified invoices. It's a prosecutable case of embezzlement, wire fraud, and corporate malfeasance. We've got them dead to rights." While Arthur built the financial case, Clara and Maya focused on Project Nightingale. Clara, guided by her father's notes, began to understand the true scope of his invention. It wasn't just an encryption method. It was a revolutionary piece of artificial intelligence that could adapt and evolve to threats. It made every existing data security system on the planet obsolete. Her father hadn't just built a better mousetrap, he genetically engineered a dragon. Maya, meanwhile, was working her legal magic. She researched Argent's solutions and found the connection her father had suspected. The CEO of Argent was a man named Marcus Thorne, a college rival of David's. But more importantly, through a series of shell corporations, Maya discovered that Eleanor held a significant hidden stake in Argent. The plan was sickeningly clear. They would use David's position to bankrupt Innovatic, have Argent buy it for nothing, and then Eleanor would profit immensely when Argent absorbed and suppressed the very technology her son had helped steal. "It's a classic bust-out scheme," Maya explained, pacing her office. "They're insiders, intentionally running the company into the ground to benefit a third party they're secretly connected to. If we can prove this collusion, they're not just facing civil lawsuits. They're facing serious prison time." Clara's role was the most difficult. She had to go home every night and play the part of the meek, confused wife. She would sit at the dinner table across from David, listening to him talk about his stressful day trying to save her legacy, and she would have to nod and look concerned. The urge to scream, to throw the evidence in his face, was a physical pressure in her chest. But she held it in, channeling her rage into a cold, precise performance. "Have you had a chance to look at those papers, honey?" he asked on Wednesday evening, his voice dripping with false patience. "I have," she said, her voice soft. "Giving up my father's company." He put his arm around her, a gesture that made her skin crawl. "It's not giving up, it's letting me save it. Trust me, Clara. This is the only way." "I do trust you," she lied, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. It was the most difficult sentence she had ever uttered. "I'll sign them. I'll bring them with me to the board meeting on Friday." The relief on his face was so profound, so absolute, that it was almost comical. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're doing the right thing. You'll see. I'll make you proud." He thought he was closing his trap. He had no idea he was walking directly into hers. On Thursday, the day before the meeting, Clara did one last thing. She went to the Innovatech headquarters, a place she hadn't visited since her father's funeral. She walked through the quiet halls, past the photos of her father shaking hands with industry leaders. She went to his old office, which had been kept locked and preserved as a memorial. Using the key from her father's keychain, she let herself in. The room was just as he'd left it. Schematics on the whiteboard, a half-finished prototype on the workbench, the faint smell of coffee and metal. She went to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Tucked away at the back was a thin portfolio. Inside was a single, signed document. It was an addendum to the company's bylaws, drafted and ratified by the board 5 years prior. Her father, ever cautious, had included a clause. It stated that, in the event of a proposed sale of the company or a transfer of the controlling shares, the final vote could be triggered not by the proxy, but by the direct heir, provided they were present. It was a fail-safe, a dead man's switch. He had put in place to protect his legacy. David, in his arrogant haste, had clearly never bothered to read the fine print of the corporate governance. He believed his authority as proxy was absolute. He was wrong. Clara took the document, placing it carefully in her briefcase alongside the printouts of the fraudulent bank transfers, the evidence of Eleanor's shell corporations, and the patent filings for Project Nightingale. She had all the pieces, she had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. All that was left was the execution. As she closed the door to her father's office, she felt his presence with her, a quiet strength bolstering her own. The decorative thing was about to be put on display, but not in the way anyone expected. She was not an ornament to be admired. She was a weapon, polished and ready to be deployed. Friday morning arrived with a cold, steely gray sky that matched the mood in Clara's heart. She dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple dark blue sheath dress, professional, understated, and utterly forgettable. She wanted them to see the same old Clara, the quiet wife who was in over her head. Her hands were steady as she applied a light touch of makeup. In the mirror, her own eyes looked back at her, clear and cold. The frightened, heartbroken woman from Sunday was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman forged in betrayal and tempered by a righteous fury. David was preening in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He was radiating an almost giddy excitement, the thrill of a predator closing in on a successful kill. He turned to her, his smile broad and confident. "Ready, honey?" he asked, his voice booming with false magnanimity. "The first day of our new future. I'm ready," she said, her voice a quiet echo of his. She picked up her simple leather briefcase. It felt heavier than usual, weighted with the truth that was about to detonate their lives. Inside, nestled amongst the damning evidence, were the papers he had given her. She had signed them, just as she had promised. On the signature line, in her neat, careful script, was a name, Clara Thomas, rightful heir. He wouldn't notice the slight, defiant addition until it was far too late. They drove to the Innovatech headquarters in silence. David was too absorbed in his impending victory to make small talk, occasionally tapping out messages on his phone, likely to his mother or Marcus Thorne. Clara stared out the window, watching the city slide by. She felt strangely calm, her emotions packed away behind a wall of cold resolve. She thought of her father, of his quiet strength, his belief in her. She was not just doing this for revenge. She was reclaiming his legacy from the jackals. The Innovatech boardroom was on the top floor, a large, imposing space with a panoramic view of the city. The long mahogany table was already occupied by the board members, a group of 6 men and women, most of whom had worked with her father for decades. They looked somber and defeated. David had clearly sold them the same story of impending doom. Eleanor was already there, seated at the far end of the table, not as a board member, but as an invited, family stakeholder. She gave Clara a nod that was both triumphant and dismissive. David took his place at the head of the table, placing his briefcase down with a resonant thud. He was in his element, a master of the corporate stage. Clara took a seat to his right, a step down from the seat of power exactly where he expected her to be. She placed her own briefcase on the floor beside her chair, out of sight. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," David began, his voice smooth and commanding. "As you know, we are facing unprecedented financial challenges due to a series of market downturns and, frankly, a lack of forward-thinking innovation in recent years. Innovatech is on the verge of insolvency." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the room. Clara watched the faces of the board members. She saw sadness, resignation, and a flicker of anger in the eyes of Mr. Fod Henderson, her father's oldest friend. "I have spent the last several months trying to right this ship," David continued, his voice filled with feigned humility. "But the debt is simply too great. However, I have not come to you today with only bad news. I have found a lifeline, a way to preserve the jobs of our employees and ensure that the legacy of Thomas's name, at least, is not tarnished by bankruptcy." He gestured to a stack of folders in front of him. "Argent Solutions has made a generous offer to acquire Innovatech. They are willing to assume all our debt and absorb our staff. It is not the outcome any of us wanted, but it is, I'm afraid, the only one available." He opened a folder. The offer is contingent on a swift decision. They need our answer. Today, I have discussed this at length with Clara, and as the holder of the controlling shares, she has agreed that this is the best course of action. She has transferred her full authority to me to see this deal through. He slid the papers she had signed across the table toward the corporate secretary. As you can see, I have the full and legal proxy to vote her shares. I vote yes on the sale. I am now asking the board to ratify that decision. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mr. Henderson looked at Clara, his eyes filled with a sad, pleading question. She met his gaze and gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Eleanor spoke from her end of the table, her voice oozing with false sympathy. This has been terribly difficult for Clara. Of course, it's a lot for a woman to handle, but she is being very brave. She knows this is for the best. She is a decorative thing, but a sensible one. There it was again. The phrase. This time, it did not sting. It was a cue. It was the starting pistol for the end of their world. Clara reached down and retrieved her briefcase, placing it on the table with a soft click. All eyes turned to her. David looked annoyed by the interruption. "Is there something you'd like to add, honey?" he asked, his tone patronizing. "Yes," Clara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tense silence. "There is." She stood up. She did not look at David or Eleanor. She addressed the board. "My husband has painted a very grim picture of this company, a picture of failure, of debt, of a legacy on the verge of collapse. But his story is a work of fiction." A murmur went through the room. David's smile faltered. "Clara, what are you doing? Sit down. We've discussed this." She ignored him. "For the past few days, I have been conducting my own review of the company's finances. With the help of a forensic accountant." She opened her briefcase and took out a thick binder, placing it on the table. "This is what I found." She turned to the first page, a detailed flowchart of bank transfers. "I found that over the past 18 months, the money was funneled through a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands." She paused, then looked directly at Eleanor. "Corporations owned and controlled by one Eleanor Vance." The color drained from Eleanor's face. She started to speak, but no words came out. David shot to his feet. "This is outrageous! Slander, Clara! You're hysterical! You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Clara said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. She turned the page in the binder. "I'm talking about wire fraud. I'm talking about corporate sabotage. I'm talking about a deliberate criminal conspiracy to devalue this company to facilitate a fraudulent sale." She looked at the board members, who were now staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "The proposed buyer? Argent Solutions? My mother-in-law is a secret major shareholder. This wasn't a rescue. It was a heist. They were going to bankrupt my father's company, buy it for scrap with their own dirty money, and get away with it all." "Lies!" David shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "She's making it up. She's under stress." "She can't prove any of this." "Can't I?" Clara asked softly. She pulled the silver USB drive from her pocket and held it up for the room to see. "My father was a cautious man. He kept his own records. The real ones. Every fraudulent transfer, every falsified invoice, every email between my husband and Marcus Thorne at Argent, planning this very meeting, a copy of which has already been delivered to the SEC and the district attorney's office." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor looked like she was going to faint. David stared at the USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. His composure finally shattered, and he lunged across the table, trying to grab it from her hand. But Mr. Henderson was faster. He shot up from his chair and blocked David, his old frame surprisingly solid. "That's enough, David." The room descended into chaos. Board members were shouting. The corporate secretary was fumbling with his phone. But Clara remained perfectly still, the calm center of the hurricane she had unleashed. But the fraud is only half of the story, she said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. The room fell silent again, all eyes on her. The reason they had to devalue the company, the reason they had to sell it, is because they had no idea what it was truly worth. They thought this company was just its public face. They were wrong. She walked to the head of the table, to the large screen behind the chairman's seat. She inserted the USB drive into the port. My father's last project. He called it Nightingale. The screen lit up with her father's schematics, data flows, and market projections. Nightingale is a fully sentient, adaptive biometric encryption system. It makes all current data security obsolete. The patents were filed 2 years ago through a private trust. They are the single most valuable intellectual property in the tech sector today. Conservative estimates place the market value of this technology at over $5 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a tangible thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. Jaws were literally agape. Housed, David and Eleanor were frozen, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated horror. They had been trying to steal a few million, completely unaware that they were standing in a vault filled with billions. Their greed had been outmatched only by their ignorance. Clara let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, savoring it. She turned her gaze to David, then to Eleanor. She leaned forward, her voice a soft, cutting whisper that was audible in the tomb-like quiet. "You were right about one thing, Eleanor," she said. "I am a decorative thing. I am the ornament my father placed atop his life's work to protect it. The one thing he knew you would be too arrogant, too dismissive, and too stupid to ever look at closely." She then turned to the board. As per the company bylaws, Article 7, Section 4, the direct heir can override the proxy's vote in the event of a proposed sale. She held up the document she'd retrieved from her father's office. "I am the direct heir. The proxy is nullified. I vote no on the sale. The offer from Argent Solutions is rejected." She looked back at David, whose face had crumpled into a mask of disbelief and ruin. "And as the majority shareholder, my first act is to call for a new vote. A vote to remove David Vance from his advisory position and from the board of directors, effective immediately." Mr. Henderson's voice boomed in the quiet room. "I second the motion. All in favor?" Clara asked. A chorus of ahs echoed around the table. It was unanimous. Just then, the doors to the boardroom swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothed detectives stepped inside. One of the detectives held up a file. "David Vance, Eleanor Vance, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and wire fraud." The final, beautiful, terrible implosion had begun. The silence was broken by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled, decisive action. As the police led a sputtering, protesting David and a catatonically silent Eleanor from the boardroom, Clara felt a profound and sudden exhaustion. It was the feeling of a soldier after a long and brutal war. The adrenaline that had sustained her for days drained away, leaving a hollow space where the anger and grief had been. But through the exhaustion, there was a deep, thrumming sense of victory. Justice had not just been served, it had been delivered with surgical precision. The board members, still reeling from the dual revelations of the company's near theft and its astronomical hidden value, surrounded her. Their expressions of defeat had been replaced with awe and a dawning fervent respect. Mr. Henderson, his eyes wet with tears, clasped her hand in both of his. "Your father would be so proud, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So incredibly proud. He always said you were the smartest person he knew." Clara could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. An emergency session was called right there in the room. With David's seat now vacant, the path was clear. Mr. Henderson made the motion. "I propose we appoint Clara Thomas as interim CEO and chairman of the board of Innovatech, effective immediately. to guide the company through this transition and oversee the development of Project Nightingale. The vote was instantaneous and unanimous. Just like that, she was no longer the decorative wife or the grieving daughter. She was in charge. The weight of the responsibility was immense, but it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a birthright, a mantle she was finally ready to assume. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of the arrests and the foiled takeover of Innovadex sent shockwaves through the financial world. The revelation of Project Nightingale turned the story from a simple corporate scandal into a global tech phenomenon. The company's stock, which had been languishing, was halted, and then, upon reopening, skyrocketed to unprecedented heights. Innovadex, the sleepy little firm nobody was watching, was suddenly the most important tech company on the planet. Clara, guided by Maya's legal counsel and Mr. Henderson's institutional knowledge, moved with a speed and confidence that surprised everyone, including herself. She wasn't just playing the part of a CEO, she was one. She hired a new, top-tier management team, fired the executives who had been complicit in David's scheme, and poured resources into bringing Nightingale to market. She found that the language of business, of strategy, and innovation was a language she knew fluently. It was her native tongue, taught to her by her father in his workshop. One evening, after a grueling 16-hour day, she returned not to the cold, empty house she had shared with David, but to a new apartment she had leased in the city, a clean, modern space that held no memories of betrayal. She opened her briefcase and took out the silver USB drive. There was one file she hadn't been able to bring herself to open yet. It was labeled, "For Clara." She plugged the drive in and clicked the file. It was another video of her father, filmed the same day as the first one. He looked directly at the camera, but this time, his expression was softer, filled with a father's love. "My dearest Clara," he began, "if you're watching this, it means you won. I knew you would. I know this must have been the hardest thing you've ever had to do. I'm sorry I had to leave you this fight. I tried to protect you from it, but I couldn't protect you from your own heart." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You chose to love a man who could never appreciate your true worth. You hid your brilliant mind because you thought it made you unlovable. I hope by now, you see how wrong you were. Your mind, your strength, your integrity. That is your beauty, Clara. That is your value. Never hide it again." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened. "Nightingale is yours now," he continued. "It's more than just a piece of technology. It's a chance for you to build a better world. Use it wisely. Build something that lasts. Build a legacy not of wealth, but of worth. And live, Clara. Don't just win. Live a life that is full and happy and true to who you are. That is all I ever wanted for you." The video ended, leaving Clara alone in the quiet of her new apartment, the city lights twinkling outside her window. The tears were not of sorrow, but of release. She finally understood. Her father hadn't just left her a company, he had left her a roadmap back to herself. The downfall of David and Eleanor was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of hers. As a small act of mercy, a nod to the woman she used to be, she instructed her lawyers not to pursue David and Eleanor for civil damages beyond the recovery of the stolen funds. The criminal charges were more than enough. Their ruin would be complete without her needing to add to it. She was powerful now, and the truly powerful had no need for petty cruelty. A year later, Clara stood on a stage, bathed in the bright lights of a tech conference in Geneva. She was accepting an award for Innovator of the Year. Innovate, under her leadership, had successfully launched the first phase of the Nightingale security platform, and it was already changing the world. The company was valued at over $30 billion, but more importantly, it was a place of creativity, integrity, and purpose. The employees were happy, the work was meaningful, and the future was bright. Clara, dressed in a sharp, elegant pantsuit, looked out at the sea of faces in the audience. She was no longer the quiet, unassuming woman from a year ago. She was poised, confident, and utterly in command. She spoke about her father's vision, about the importance of ethics in technology, and about building a future where innovation served humanity. Her voice was strong, her message clear. There was no trace of the decorative thing she was once told she was. After the ceremony, she was approached by a man. He was tall, with kind eyes, and a warm, genuine smile. His name was Ben Carter, and he was the lead engineer on the Nightingale project, a young genius her father had personally mentored before he passed. That was an incredible speech, Ms. Thomas, he said, his admiration clear. Your father, he would have been so proud to hear you say those things. He always said this was about more than just code. Please call me Clara, she said, returning his smile. And thank you, Ben. I couldn't have done any of this without you and the team. You brought my father's vision to life. They talked for hours that evening, not about work, but about everything else. Books, travel, their shared love for old science fiction movies. Ben saw her not as a CEO or an heiress. He was brilliant, funny, and deeply respectful. He listened to her ideas with genuine interest and challenged her with a playful intelligence she found intoxicating. It was a connection unlike any she had ever known, built not on illusion or need, but on a foundation of mutual admiration and intellectual sparks. It was the start of something new, something real. Occasionally, news of her former life would filter through. David and Eleanor had both been convicted. The evidence against them was so overwhelming that their trial was a mere formality. Eleanor, stripped of her wealth and social standing, was serving a 7-year sentence in a minimum security prison. Her health was reportedly failing. David, due to his more active role and the evidence of his collusion with Argent Solutions, received a harsher sentence of 15 years. Marcus Thorne of Argent Solutions was also convicted, and his company collapsed under the weight of the scandal. They had all been ruined, their names becoming a cautionary tale in business schools about the fatal combination of arrogance and greed. Clara felt nothing when she heard this news. No satisfaction, no pity. They were ghosts from a different life, a life that no longer belonged to her. Her focus was on the future, on building, creating, and living. Several months later, Clara was walking with Ben through a park on a crisp autumn afternoon. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. They were holding hands, their conversation easy and comfortable. She felt a sense of peace, so profound it was almost startling. It was the quiet joy of a life well lived, a life she had built for herself on the ashes of her old one. She thought back to that Sunday, to the click of the teacup and the cruel dismissive words. She realized that Eleanor's insult, the phrase meant to break her, had in fact been a gift. It had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire within her. By calling her a decorative thing, they had given her the permission she needed to stop being one. They had forced her to become the woman her father had always known she was. She looked at Ben, at the love and respect in his eyes, and she smiled. She had learned the most important lesson of her life. You should never have to shrink yourself to be loved. The right person will not ask you to hide your light. They will stand beside you and admire the way you shine. The suffering was finally over, not just because her enemies were defeated, but because she was finally, completely, and unapologetically herself. She was living the life she truly deserved.